If you've ever traveled to a foreign country, you probably tried to blend in with the locals. You found out what the natives wear and you try to dress like them as much as is reasonable and decent. Now, a few of us want to wear a sign saying tourist, though following a tour guide carrying a flag kind of gives it away, doesn't it? In the same way, a Christian doesn't want to wear a sign saying, hey, look at me, I'm a Christian, but for a different reason than the tourist. A Christian doesn't wear a sign because it's too easily seen as self-promoting and pride-filled. In fact, Jesus gave specific instructions against such conduct in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 6 verses 1 through following. He said, don't do your righteousness in front of men to be seen of men. However, the Christian must be very careful not to wear camouflage either. In other words, you don't want to stand out and look like you're self-promoting, but you also don't want to just disappear and blend in. You know what I mean? Like a hunter wearing clothing that blends into the countryside. Christian camouflage is designed to hide our most important identity from the watching world. Now that's a contradiction in terms, isn't it? Christian camouflage. It just doesn't work. In other words, it's living like everyone else in order to blend in with them. People make all kinds of excuses, but none are acceptable to God. If we're hiding our identity from the world, we're not Christians, period. Now with that in mind, let's begin today's study in our series on 1 Peter with a reminder of how those early Christians were going to face the flames of persecution. Sometimes quite literally. In first chapter, and that's found in 1 Peter chapter 1 verses 1 through chapter 2 verse 10, where Peter gave three great gifts, three wonderful gifts to help Christians live holy lives, especially those about to undergo persecution, because they needed that in those tough times. They are the living hope of eternity with God, the living word that tells us what we need to know so we can have faith, and the living stone so we can build our lives on a solid foundation that doesn't move, that stands firm. With those three gifts, we can live holy lives. And by living holy lives, we can face the flames. And today we're going to begin looking at the great middle section of the book where we're going to learn, look at the nuts and bolts of this, the inner working of holy living. The gritty reality of day-to-day living as Christians under the microscope of an unfriendly world. Because the world is unfriendly and it's watching us closely. In fact, our first study today is called Standing Out as Sojourners from 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 11 and 12, as Peter tells us how to live holy lives before the watching world in order to silence the critics. Let's read the text and then begin our study. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. Beloved, I urge you as aliens and strangers to abstain from fleshly lusts which wage war against the soul. Keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles, so that in the things in which they slander you as evildoers, they may, because of your good deeds, as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation. Well, it's this section, these two verses, is where I got the title for this lesson, as well as the concepts of silencing the critics and the watching world. Silencing the critics and the watching world crop up several times in 1 Peter. And we'll see more of those as these studies continue unfolding. But the first time is right here in this text. They're drawn from the idea of unbelievers who slander the believers. But as they observe the believers' good conduct, end up praising God. So they start off as critics and then they get silenced because of the good behavior of these Christians that they're watching. They're watching us, the world is watching us, and if we conduct ourselves properly, quite often we'll silence their criticism. Well, let's look at standing out as sojourners from 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11. And this verse says, Beloved, I urge you as aliens and strangers to abstain from fleshly lusts which wage war against the soul. 1 Peter 2, verse 11. And so we're going to look at that first part there, aliens and strangers or sojourners. Our title is the first point of the study. And that begs kind of the question, what is a sojourner? In the New American Standard, the word is alien. That's the idea of an alien, an immigrant living in another country or a sojourner. Someone who is living in a land that is not their home. And closely connected to this is the word stranger or pilgrim. Now, this is the idea of a short-term visitor, a stranger or a pilgrim. There's somebody that's a tourist. I've done that a few times, been to a few different countries, and as a pilgrim, stayed a couple of weeks, and that was pretty much it, and came home. I'm not an alien in the sense that I moved to another country. I was born and raised here in the United States. That's why this is an American missionary. That's why these studies are under that heading, an American missionary, because I'm an American. But Abraham, it's interesting that that as we talk about these ideas of being aliens and strangers, Abraham described himself that way. Kind of started with him back in Genesis chapter 12, or actually in chapter 23, where he first really made that statement. He declared himself to be a stranger and a pilgrim in a land, even though he had been living there for 60 years. Genesis 23, verses 3 and 4. Then Abraham rose from before his dad and spoke to the sons of Heth, saying, I am a stranger and a sojourner among you. See, the length of time and the land wasn't the issue. That wasn't the issue. Abraham wasn't focused on the physical, but the spiritual. Not the temporal land where he was dwelling for the few days of his life, though it was almost 160, it was well over 160, but the eternal land where he would live forever. Look at Hebrews chapter 11. Turn over a few pages in your Bible. Keep your marker there in 1 Peter 2. We'll come back. But in Hebrews chapter 11, just a few pages over in your Bible, the Hall of Fame of Faith is given. And in that, we see the story of Abraham recounted in a very brief synopsis. And notice what they say about him in verses 9 and 10. Hebrews chapter 11. I want to start with verse 8. I have 9 and 10 here on the monitor behind me. By faith, Hebrews 11:8. By faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith he lived as an alien in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise. For he was looking for the city which has foundation, whose architect and builder is God. So he went out to a place that did not become his. It was somebody else's. But Abraham was okay with that. Abraham was looking somewhere else. He wasn't focused on this earth, this land. He was looking ahead to the future. And in verses 13 through 16, he continues, all these, talking about Abraham and Sarah, died in faith, and as well as Isaac and Jacob, without receiving the promises. So they didn't get that promised land. But having seen them and having welcomed them from a distance and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. They're seeking something different than this world. And indeed, if they had been thinking of that country from which they went out, they would have had opportunity to return. And so the idea here is that we live as strangers, as aliens, in a land that's not ours. We know this isn't our home. We understand that. Abraham understood that. And so we need to have that same focused recognition of our status in this world. That means that even though we live in this world, we know it isn't our home. Like the song goes, this world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. Do we really believe that? I tell you, when I talk to some Christians, especially as they get older, and I'll be 60 next year, and as I think about these things that come with aging, it's amazing how many people that are in their 70s, or especially up in their 80s, and their health is going, and they're fighting tooth and nail the idea of leaving this earth. Why? Why? And that's easy for me to say because I'm looking at that and thinking that's 20 years away. But it'll be here before I know it. And I hope that my attitude will be will be simply, I'm ready to go home and be with the Lord. Now, until that time, I'm going to do everything I can to continue being an American missionary, to continue preaching the gospel, because that's my mission in life. But we have to learn to live like that, live like this world isn't our home, certainly not our forever home. Have you ever used the phrase forever home in reference to a house? Whoever came up with that slogan for realtors knew how to get into people's hearts and minds, because most of us are drawn to the stability of thinking we can be in one place forever. Even though we know we're going to leave it when we die, and probably we'll move out of that house long before we actually leave Earth forever. But even Christians get caught up in a "this world is my home" delusion. We cannot let the things of this world capture our hearts and minds. Live in a way that makes us stand out as people who aren't living for this world. Live in a way that shows people we're looking to heaven as our forever home. And we can do that by talking about heaven, and talking about eternity, talking about, well, the things of this world aren't that important. And a number of different ways we can do that. But that leads us to our second point, which is stand back from lust, from fleshly lust. That's also in verse 11, second half of verse 11. Going back to 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11. Beloved, I urge you as aliens and strangers to do this, to abstain from fleshly lust, which wage war against the soul. Now, abstain means basically to refrain from, to stand back or away from something that is dangerous. Think of a visit to Grand Canyon. Have you ever been to the Grand Canyon or some place where you go up on a high peak or on a high slope or something that you could fall off of, maybe a tall building? And there's a warning to stay back, keep away from the edge. If we get too close, we might slip off and fall. Or it can be described as being careful with fire. We stay back so we won't get burned. One of my grandsons my grandson from Florida visited recently, and we had to warn him to stand back from the fireplace. Well, actually, we didn't have time to warn him because he touched it with his little finger. Fortunately, it was just a little singe. It wasn't burned. But it was enough for him for the rest of the time they were here that the fireplace was on. He would stand back and say, "Hot." One of the few words that he knew, hot. He knew that it was hot. He stood back from it. And that's what Peter's saying in this case. He's urging us to stay back from things that are the fleshly lust, things that are dangerous to us. They are strong desires for carnal things, which are a dangerous enemy, things of this flesh. In chapter 4 and verse 2, he gives us a little bit more information about it. He says in chapter 4, verse 2, that we should stand back from, live the rest of the time I said in chapter 4, verse 2, so as to live the rest of the time in the flesh no longer. So we don't live any longer. The rest of whatever time we have here on earth as strangers and pilgrims. We no longer live pursuing fleshly lusts. No longer for the lust of men, but for the will of God. So we're looking for the will of God. We're trying to serve the will of God. Now, thinking about that in the context of sojourners, I want to think about it from a standpoint for a moment. It's okay to fit in or blend in with the native people to a certain point so that we're not too obvious as a tourist. In other words, we don't wear the sign that says, "Look at me, I'm a Christian," which for most people that they see, if they see us acting in certain ways and claiming certain things, what they hear from us is, what they hear us saying, it may not be what we're saying, but what they hear us saying is, "Look at me, I'm better than you." It may not be what we attend. And I'll tell you what, I'll have to admit this. With some brethren, the things that I hear them say, I'm not so sure that isn't what they mean by it. I'm a Christian, I'm better than you. And we better be careful. We better make sure that's not us. Because it's how the world sees us if we're not very, very careful in how we come across to people. And I'm talking about here where we live. And even if we're born here physically, this isn't our home. We can learn the customs, language, and dress and seek to fit in with those around us to a certain point. But there are some customs. There are some things we just must not learn. Specifically those that serve the fleshly lust. The things that wage war against the soul. Let's stay away from them to stand out instead of fitting in or blending in with the world around us. Again, there's no such thing as camouflage Christianity. Peter gives a short list in 1 Peter 4, verse 3. He says, "For the time already past is sufficient for you to have carried out the desire of the Gentiles." So there after verse 2, he said, "Don't live according to the flesh any longer, but to the will of God." Then he says, because you already did enough of that. If you lived for the world and you came out of the world into Christ, you've done enough of that. Leave it in the past. Don't bring it with you and don't go back to it. It's sufficient for you to have carried out the desire of the Gentiles, having pursued a course of sensuality, lust, drunkenness, carousing, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. Now, all of these revolve around alcohol and sexual immorality. That's really what they're all about. They revolve around alcohol and partying, which is always connected or very frequently connected to idolatry and the idolatrous practices of the pagans during the days of the apostles in those first centuries, and in many countries across the world today. The people in those days did those things in their idolatry. But have you noticed how here in America what we've done is we've made having fun our idol. That's our idolatrous practice, is having fun. Look at the infield of any NASCAR race, the parking lot of any football game, or just any Friday night TGIF, thank God it's Friday, event. It's all about drinking. And I'll just say this very bluntly. Christians have no business engaging in that behavior, none whatsoever. In fact, don't even play with the fire hot, as my grandson said, of social drinking, because you'll just get burned. Some brethren attempt to defend it as if it's an acceptable lifestyle, but it's really just a fleshly lust waging war against your soul. When we say fleshly lust or at war against the Christian soul, it should concern us, and that's something we should be wary of and concerned about. Because warfare has one goal: conquest, victory. And it has two tactics: break things and kill people. That's how you win a war. You break things and you kill people, and you're better at it than your enemy. Satan has one goal: conquest, to conquer you. And he seeks to break you and to kill you to accomplish it. He's happy to do both. Now, Paul described, and it's interesting that Paul described the power of the flesh, these fleshly lusts, as a force that's almost personal. He personifies it almost, actually, in an effort to describe how powerful it is in Satan's effort to use it to control us. Romans 7 verse 22 and 23 says this: I delight in the law of God after the inward man, but I see a different law in my members. So my spirit wants to do one thing, but my flesh wants to do something else. And they're waging war. The flesh is warring against the law of its mind and bringing me into captivity under the law of sin, which is in my members. So he's calling the law of sin as a force. It's the idea of a force. And the idea is not that it's personal, that it's real, that the flesh is evil or anything like that, but it's a powerful influence on us. And I dare say that anybody watching this and listening to this lesson knows exactly what I'm talking about. Something that you've wanted to do, and you know it's not right, or something you don't want to do that you know you should, and you feel that inner struggle. And it's almost like you can see the combatants fighting each other, saying, do it, don't do it, and who's going to win, the inner man or the fleshly lust? That's what Paul's saying. That this is our daily struggle, our daily internal battle against the power of the flesh. Think of it like those warnings of the Grand Canyon. Stand back from the edge. Stand back from fleshly lust in order to live so that we don't die, because we know it wants to kill us. And the flesh wants to destroy and control us. It wants to conquer us. And it'll break us in the process. Well, our third and final point here is in verse 12, and that is to stand out in daily living. This is how we stand out as sojourners in our daily living. Verse 12, keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles, so that in the thing in which they slander you as evildoers, they may, because of your good deeds, as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation. See the watching world? As they observe them, they're watching us. And they're going to be slandering us. That makes them our critics. And so the way to fight that is to stand out in daily living. And this gets to the why. And I want us to notice something about the why here. The why is not some medium purpose, some lower purpose of self-protection or self-preservation. It's not just about not falling to our death or getting burned. It's about setting the right example for the watching world. It's about the watching world and silencing those critics. The world is watching us constantly and critically, and we must be on our best behavior. The word excellent here your behavior excellent. Excellent is the idea, interestingly, of beautiful, attractively good, good that inspires others to embrace what is good. We must live in an honorable manner for the world to see the living hope, the living word, and the living stone in us. And that's why we must stay back from social drinking. I want to come back to social drinking here for a second. We need to just stay away from it because it lies to the world, and it lies to us, but it lies to the world by telling them two things. Drinking is okay, and we're not serious about our faith. So if you're a social drinker, I'm going to just tell you right now, if you're a social drinker, you're lying to the world. You're telling them that drinking is okay and that you're not serious about your faith. Now, we can talk all day long and tell people, well, drink in moderation. But I'm going to tell you right now, I worked with a bunch of drinkers. They can't hear you over the buzz of the alcohol. They can't. At the best, they won't believe that we're really serious about our faith. If you're a social drinker and you drink with your people that you work with, at best, they're going to say you're not serious about your faith. That's the best you can get out of it. At worst, they're just going to consider you another lying hypocrite. Now, either way, you're losing and they're losing. God's cause is hurt. Instead, we want them to see our good lives. They want to see us as the absolute best neighbors, best classmates, best co-workers, etc. And then they will immediately know that any lies being spread about us are just that, lies. Now, we live in an age where some are quick to call us haters for not supporting various causes like gay rights and transgender issues and things like that. We mustn't support those lifestyles or causes. We can't. But we must not give them any evidence to prove that we hate anyone. We can't. And I mean anyone. I want you to listen to me, ladies and gentlemen. Listen to me very carefully. If we speak of the LGBTQ people, and I think that's the acronym for all these people that live these alternative lifestyles. If we speak of them with disdain and spite and cruelty and meanness, they have a right to believe we're hateful people. They do. Because we're saying things that are hateful. In other words, we can't support their sinful lifestyles and their sinful activities. But we must not ever utter genuinely hateful words, especially any words advocating violence against them or anybody who's doing things that we can't condone. But you can't. We must be on our best behavior, which means we bite our tongues and reshape our words so that no genuine hate speech comes out of our lips. They can't. We cannot be the people who talk like that. And the easiest way to do that is to get it out of our hearts, get that thinking out of our hearts. That way, when we are accused of being evil people by people with an agenda, and it's happening and it's going to happen more and more, those who know us won't believe it because they've seen us and heard us day after day and know the accusations aren't true. Now, sadly, as we'll see later, that doesn't always work, but we must live in a way that demonstrates to people who want to see it the transformative power of the living Word of God at work in our hearts and share that Word with the watching world. Peter wrote to people who would be accused of the most horrible things. They would be accused of being atheists because they wouldn't worship Caesar, cannibalism because of the Lord's Supper, incest because everybody was called brother and sister. And then horrible things would happen to many of them as they faced the flames. Some would lose their possessions, their freedom, and even their lives. But imagine a courtroom scene where you're brought up on charges of being a cannibal or engaging in incest or being a hater of certain people and your neighbors who aren't Christians come out and say, oh, he's a good man. That's not him. That's not the kind of, he doesn't do those things. Whatever you're saying isn't true. Or she's a good woman. She's not like that. Whatever you say about her, that's not true. That's not her. And none of those accusations are true. And on that day of visitation, God is glorified. I've given this a lot of thought, and I hope you're still listening, and I hope you'll pay attention to this. I've given this a lot of thought lately, and I've concluded that people my age and older were fooled by the goodness of our neighbors. Most of them were church-going, or at least law-abiding people, so our neighborhoods and towns were safe and stable with a fairly standard concept of right and wrong. Everybody pretty much believed the same things and behaved the same way. Now that's changed. It's just changed. And we're shocked to find out that we're living next to an open sewer. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you, we've always lived next to an open sewer, but the smell was masked by the fence of false religion. It hid it. We knew something smelled right. And now we know what it is because the fences have been torn down. And it's sad that the fence is down, and some people, I hear brethren talk about this, and they sound downright despondent, like we should just quit and give up. Let the Lord come and end it now. Why? Because we're just now realizing we live in a sinful world? That's pathetic. That's just sad. It makes me wonder, are we more concerned about social stability in our nice, comfortable, middle-class lifestyle than the advancement of the gospel? I'm serious about that. I'm telling you, this is a lesson that challenges me, and I'm hoping it's challenging you to think more carefully about what kind of life you're living if you stand out in your daily living. If 90%, let's say just 90% of our neighbors believe they're saved, even though they're not actually, and our only obvious distinction is we believe in baptism, it makes it hard for us to stand out to the world. The church, the people who go to these denominational churches and think they're saved, think we're kooks for believing in baptism, so they don't pay much attention to us, but they think we're pretty much the same. They'll tell me, as a lady said the other day, Jesus is in everything, every church. The unchurched see our arguments with the church, the other religious groups as over baptism as a debate about meaningless minutia. What we need to do, instead of throwing up our hands in despair, this world's falling apart, the sky is falling, Chicken Little mentality, is be thankful for a greater opportunity to stand out. Yes, fewer and fewer of our neighbors claim to be Christian. Fewer and fewer of our neighbors go to church. But think of it as this standpoint, fewer and fewer of our neighbors are trapped in false religions and think they're saved. Now, we have a hard time still have a hard time reaching them with the gospel, but at least we're not having to get them out of this false religion. As more and more denominations adapt to the culture around us, they too will suffer the same disintegration and degradation as the God deniers, and New Testament Christians will have an opportunity to stand out as unbending believers in the Lord Jesus Christ. When the world around us swirls in endless chaos, have you watched the news lately? And Christians just keep pressing on toward that higher goal with confidence and stability, the watching world will see it. People will be drawn to the power of a living hope that shines in your heart because the living Word has transformed your life, and a living stone holds you up forever. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the Lord Jesus Christ. And the world is watching us. So what do they see? What do they see? Do they see sojourners standing out by faith? Or do they see Christians who've put on camouflage? And again, there is no such thing as Christians wearing camouflage. Because if you're wearing camouflage, you're not a Christian, okay? If you're blending in with the world, you're not a Christian. I don't care what you claim to be. If I'm blending in with the world, I'm not a Christian, no matter what I claim to be. What do they say? Please, please, please be standing out as sojourners who stay back from fleshly lust and have beautiful, attractive souls. Not the external, but the souls, the internal, what shines from within, draws people to you. We can do that in this world we live in. This world's dark and desperate and despondent, and we need to be uplifting and hopeful and show a living hope through a living word built on a living stone. Won't you do that? Won't you do that? Well, it's my goal here on An American Missionary to draw you closer to God and help you be one who draws others close as well. If I can help you become a Christian or be right with God, let me know. Reach out to me by Facebook Messenger or email, also on the board here, on the monitor here behind me, anamericanmissionarybg@gmail.com. Facebook, there's a number of ways you can reach me, and I'm sure you're aware of how to do that. Just do it. Let me help you be right with God. I'd love to study the Bible with you. Well, thank you for watching. Until next time, I'm James McElhenney, and I'm praying that your heart will be filled with the glory of God.